All right. Hello, everyone. Happy spring. We got 3 more weeks for the course, and today will be the third last Q&A session for your lecture materials. And let me just speak about your programming test number 4. Michael was asking about that in the
Today's
chat.
the last Q&A session.
Hello?
Wait, you said today's the last Q&A session?
The third last.
The third last Q&A session.
Today is the third last week, right? So that's the third last session.
But there are 2 sessions per week.
No,
There's another one.
The Tuesday one has been canceled because we got very low attendance. So I thought may not be necessary.
It's low attendance because of the sudden change.
For your programming test number 4, okay, so for programming test 4, there will be a review session. I actually sent an announcement yesterday about a survey about your availability. You can check I'm going to send a reminder later tonight. So there will be a review session. Maybe I'll go over maybe the practice test, maybe part of it, or maybe maybe not the entirety of that because it's sufficiently similar to your programming test number 3. So there will be a review session either Thursday or Friday. We are not confirmed just yet because I just want to see what your availability might be. So just do the survey and then let me know which day, which time actually works better for you. Okay. If you missed it, that's okay. Just check your announcement or just log into the MMN. Go to the NN eClass site and then just go there and then you will see the announcement, or just go to the Q&A, just go to the survey and fill in your availability. Okay. And then, so there's also a practice test. So it's up to you if you want to attend a review session. So I will highly encourage you to actually do the test, the practice test before you actually attend a session. So you can also ask me any specific questions, or you can just come and then just go over, and I'll just go over some parts with you. And then what's really new about the programming tests? First of all, it's still going to be OOP. Because OOP is really one of the primary learning outcomes for this course. So we want to push you to really do one more assessment on the OOP, right? Just like a programming, make sure you're comfortable with it. So for the OOP, it's going to be very similar to your programming test number 3, similar formats, but now this time be careful. There might be 3 classes that you have to program. So this will be closer to your practice test. In your actual test for programming test number 3, we only ask you to program 2 classes, but this time you might be asked to really program 3 classes. So just get prepared for that. And 2D arrays that we just started this week will not be covered. Okay, 2D arrays will not be covered. Okay, and however, static attributes will be covered. Will be covered, right? So when you do the practice test number 4, you will see why it could be useful. All right, so that's about some information for programming test number 4. It's going to be next Wednesday, so that will be your final programming test for this course. And just fill in your preference for the review session, either Thursday or Friday, and then I'll confirm the time soon. All right. So let's now talk about your question from the Google Doc. I don't have that many, so let's at least talk about the ones that's there. So the first one is actually for Michael. So there's something that's overdue to answer to Michael since the very beginning of the semester about variable shadowing. Okay, with a little bit of research on Wikipedia, which I think is quite authoritative, for this topic here. So you can also check it out on the wiki. Right. So just go for wiki and then check for variable shadowing. Okay. So here, let's say this. While I'm trying to set it up, the example, you can also read the text over here. Let's say we have a class. Let's say students. And then we have an attributes at outer scope, the scope at the class level, more precisely. So private, let's say string, and also name. And we have another, let's say method, let's say. So public, let's say we have a mutator, public void, set name. We may want to change the name for the students So here we have string and also name over here. And we learn very well under the context of this particular method, if we simply just say name over here, we know that we are really referring to the parameter, right? It's called variable shadowing. But now how do we talk about it exactly? So there are two ways to say that. Either we can say the outer variable is said to be shadowed by the inner variable. So we will say this. We will say the attribute name over here is actually shadowed by the parameter name. So you would say this particular attribute is shadowed by the parameter name. So that's one way to say that. Okay. Another term you may just want to know for your knowledge. Another way to say that would be the inner identifier, which is the name over here. We can also say the name over here actually mask the outer identifier, which is the name over here. So we can say the other way around. Over here, we can say masks. If you just try to use your imagination over here, you can think about whenever we use the name, it's basically this particular variable over here in some way is also wearing the mask of this particular name, meaning that you're actually, whenever you're referring to this name, you're really referring to that particular parameter, right? So recap. So there are two ways for you to say that. You can either say the attribute's name is shadowed by the parameter, or you can say the parameter name masks the attribute's name. Either way is fine. So Michael, does it make sense to you?
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much.
Very good. I think it's good for everybody, actually, can benefits. So guys, any follow-up question to this? I think it's something good for you to know. And variable shadowing is not just for OOP. I think for any programming language that you're going to use, as long as you got the idea about outer scope versus the inner scope. In that case, you definitely have variable shadowing in many languages. So you should that's something you should really get used to. All right. Okay, if no further questions, I'm just going to move on to the next one. The next one is actually something kind of outside the scope for this course, but I can mention that quickly. So Michael, was it from you? The question about compiler?
No, sir. No.
No? Oh, okay. I thought it might be you. All right, interesting. Anyway, I'm not sure which one of you actually asked this question. I would say it's a very thoughtful question. Okay, why don't we read it together, right? In case you're here, who asked the question, feel free to speak up if you want to ask me any follow-up. But this one, I want to just give you a little bit of detail, not too much. Otherwise, you might just get confused as well. But I can point to you some further reference if you need. Okay, it's been running over the head of your fellow student for a long time. And so when we program, something called a compiler will help us to compile and also make that the program work. For example, if you actually type some program, either in the utility class, in the JUnit class, or maybe your model package, right? Always the compiler is going to check to see if there's any syntax error or any type error, right? That's something we have seen so far, in the course. So what about the compiler itself? What kind of programming language do we actually write for the compiler? Because if the compiler, thinking this way, right? Let's just see some flow chart over here, a little bit of flow chart. Okay, think about it's like this. Given some input Java program, let's say my class.java. Okay, and then you actually got some compiler. Okay, compiler. And then the compiler basically is going to, you can think about, is either going to tell you that yes, in which case no syntax or type error. It's more like a so-called decision problem. And the formal notion about decision problem is going to be addressed in your 2001 course, the Introduction to the Theory of Computation. I think when you actually get to the second year, you'll learn about it, maybe either in the summer or maybe in the fall, right? I wouldn't get too much into it, but you can think about it as making a decision. Otherwise, you would say no. Oh, actually, beg your pardon. I really meant to say the following. Sorry. I just get it reversed. So when the compiler say, let's say no, actually depends on how you define yes and no. Okay, how about this? I would say when the compiler say no, there is simply no syntax error, right? It's more corresponding to it. Or you might say yes, there is some errors, so they will be displayed in the problems panel. Okay, so there are at least one syntax or type error. So you can think about one main job for the compiler is to find out if there's any error that can be detected before you run your program. Right, so it's either yes or no. That's why it's a decision problem. Now, the compiler itself is nothing but just a program. And its job is really to compile any given Java program. So now the question is, in what language? In what language is the compiler implemented? So that's basically the question of your fellow student. I think it's a very deeply thought question here, right? All right, so for your knowledge, what language is the compiler implemented? Okay, I can tell you that with a little bit of research. I didn't know that myself actually before I look it up. Okay, so for the compiler, so for the very first Java compiler, the very first one, the first compiler, specifically Java compiler, that one there is written in C, in the C language. You can think about the C language has its own compiler way prior to the existence of the Java compiler. That's why you can simply use the C language to implement this compiler, so that any Java program, once you pass to the compiler, you can make a decision such as if there's any syntax or type error. You can also compile that into so-called bytecode, but that's something you don't really need to worry. Okay, anyway, compiler is just like a program. Okay, so the very first Java compiler was written in the C language, and after that, now that once we get this very first compiler ready, we can also write other compiler that came later. They were simply just written in the Java language, which is also possible. It might sound a little bit weird because in order to compile Java program, the compiler itself is actually written in Java. It actually can be done simply because we simply got some working the very first Java compiler that's already working in some C language. So there's no circularity issue over here that your fellow student might be thinking about. So this is actually fine. It's a very short answer to your fellow student question. So how was the first programming language built? So in this case, since we talk about Java specifically, so for the very first compiler, it must be built by some other language. In this case, just C. Okay, so we talk about Java only. And then if you compiler, let me just say a little bit more, just for your information. Compiler is actually a very fundamental subject for those of you who are studying, all of you are studying CS. So there is a course. You can take notes. It will be too early for you to take now because you haven't really got all the foundations to take this course. I think it's called EECS1022, Compilers and Interpreters. Okay, so this is a course that's offered maybe I think quite often, maybe almost every year. So you can really maybe later on you can consider taking this course. It's a 4th year, which means there will be still some many foundation courses you have to take before that, such as data structure, theory of computation, context-free grammar, and many things, and also software design. So many things you got to learn before you can do compiler. What's really cool about a compiler is like this. Okay, very quickly, and then I can move on to the next one. You can think about a compiler is a very powerful program you can write, right? Compiler. And then it's going to take some input. The conceptual model for compiler is very easy. You just take some input and then some input file, input.txt. And then the output over here can be very flexible. The output over here Can be maybe a decision problem. Maybe you just want to type check. You want to see if there's any syntax or type errors in your program, pretty much like the Java compiler. Well, maybe the output could be you want to maybe turn your program into some database queries. There are many things you can do. And what's really powerful is the input over here, the grammar, we said. The grammar of the input can be defined by you. So this really is the powerful part for the compiler. And then for the compiler itself, you're going to read in the input file and then somehow use the appropriate data structure and algorithm to extract the structure and then to do whatever you like and then to generate the output. That's something that will be covered in this particular course. For now, I don't want to touch too much, but just to give you some high-level idea. But for those of you who might be interested in doing some substantial, useful project to really turn something into something else, that's really the general purpose for a compiler. If you're interested, 4302 might be the course you want to take for later. All right. Any follow-up question to this about compiler? Everybody's okay? All right. This question specifically is outside the scope for this course, but since your fellow student asked, so I'll just answer quickly. All right, let's now the final one from the Google Doc. I just saw that maybe just 2 minutes before the class started. Is it possible to create a global variable that's visible, accessible, and modifiable across different classes? And if so, is it practical? Okay. It is not possible to really have this some static variable that does not belong to a particular class. The best you can do, for example, let's say this. Let's say we got, let's say, class A. Okay, let's not worry about the public modifier. Let's say we also got class B over here. Any variable, like a static variable you want to declare, must be declared under the context of some class. So now if I want to, let's say we only got 2 classes in our projects. So now for any static variable, you cannot declare okay, let's say, first of all, you cannot declare a static variable outside all classes. It's simply not possible. In other words, it must be under the context of a particular class. Let's say, for example, if I put, let's say here, public static integer, and then let's say I over here. Maybe initially simply the value 2. So now what I'm saying is, for all the instances of A, they're going to share the same copy of static variable I. So that's exactly what we spoke about in the lectures, right? In the current week, right? And so that's the only way for you to share the same copy for all instances for A, right? So every time if you want to refer to this particular attributes, you will simply say A.I, right? And of course, you can also define accessor and mutator for that, which we also showed to you in the lectures. And how do you access, let's say, this particular single copy? There's only a single copy shared by all the instances of A, right? So now how do we actually get access to this particular A.I from B? Given that, assuming that class A is actually public, right? So that means all the other classes can get access to it. So now here, all we need to say is will be just A.I. So that's also possible. Because the very definition for static variable is you don't need to create any context objects. You can just use the class name, but you just have to make sure you put a correct class name to get access to the static variable. All right, so I think it pretty much answered this question here. It would be yes, you can definitely create a single variable that somehow can be accessed by many classes, yes. However, that particular static variable must be declared under one of the classes. It must be. It cannot just exist outside all the classes. All right, so that's about the question here. Any follow-up question to it about static variables? Anyone? All right, seeing none. So that's about all the questions I've received in the Google Doc. So do you guys have any more extra questions for me for this week, for the lecture? The lecture is mainly about static variables for sure. Any questions? Right, it's pretty quiet today, but I assume silence means you're okay. So Michael, no question, not many questions for you this week.
No, sir.
It's okay. You don't need to have questions
yeah.
every week. That's okay. Just a little bit surprising to me. That's fine. All right, guys, I'm gonna pause a little bit longer. Yes, from 10, go ahead. You want to speak up for your question? So 10, you want to speak up for your questions while you're typing? Why don't you speak up unless your microphone doesn't work? All right, go ahead. Just type. Yeah, just to remind you once more, while 10 is typing his question. So for your programming test number 4, as I mentioned in the very beginning, so there will be one review session, either Thursday or Friday. Just log into your MMN eClass site. So there's a survey over there. Simply, if you're interested in attending, just fill in your availability over there. All right. Can example programming test number 4 be as hard as the real test? I don't know yet. I haven't really designed the actual test, but I think it will be a very good practice for sure, right? I cannot say for sure because I haven't designed the test yet. All right, but I think it's definitely worth trying to really do the example test, right? And especially to see how you can use the static variables from there. Okay. So Sarah, you said, please make it as hard. So you don't want it to be easier than the practice test. Just want it to be as hard. All right. Any more questions here?
Professor,
Michael, go ahead.
I just thought of a question. I remember in week 9's part F4 lecture, you gave us that question where it was like number of accounts, and you asked us, what if this was made static?
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that this could be, for an example, a question that you would ask us in the exam.
Okay.
I was just wondering,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering how we would be able to prepare for those questions, like, because obviously we can't really practice them, but like.
Yeah. Okay. Let me, Michael, let me first of all go to that particular page you're talking about, and then we'll speak about it. Give me just one moment. I think this is the kind of question we will expect you to answer in a comprehensive exam. Because in that around that time you will be studying all the topics that we cover in the whole semester. So we really want to see if you can really put things together, right? So what you're talking about is this guy here. Okay, let me just basically try to. Okay. Yeah, let me just copy that page and then I'll speak about it. But for your final exam, as I said before, we don't have much information right now, but we will actually give you more guidance later. Okay, I will give you more guidance later. Let's say for this one particularly, so that's something you did for your lecture in the current week, right? Week number 9 or 10, I forgot. I'm kind of losing track. But
Week 9.
yeah, maybe 10. Yeah. For this particular case over here. So it could be the question I'm asking you in the exam. For example, I might say, consider this fragment of code. Okay, consider that. It could be that that's it. I wouldn't even give you this. I might just say, consider this fragment of code over here, which intends to really store a list of accounts using array. And we assume that the account class already exists. And we're using a counter, which is static, and then etc. Right? And then we'll simply ask you, it's more like a short essay question. And then, so you will want to justify to say a question like this. So the question will be, let me use the question itself can be, is the, let me just delete this so you will see a little bit more clearly about what the question might be. Let me just get rid of that. Okay, let's say that's the only thing you're given, let's say. And then let me just clear this. Give me one moment. Let me set it up.
Testing.
Okay, so now let's say the question could be like this. So the question is the above program correct? Okay, so your answer could be either yes or no. If you say yes, give some example code testing it. If no, give some also example code showing that it's actually running incorrectly. Showing that it's not correct. So that could be the question itself. So now I would say this will be a challenging one, I would say. In that case, number one, you should really realize this is definitely different from what you typically see in your written notes. In your written note, there's simply no static. That's something you should see right away. And then you will think to yourself, if I change from non-static, which I saw in the notes, into something that's static, so what's going to happen? So I think you should really work on coming up with some example code first. And when I say example code, it should be just about how you use the methods that we declare over here. For example, about add account. You can see as part of the question, we actually gave you add account, which will allow you to actually add, let's say for 2 objects for the clients, you can add individually to their accounts array over here. And then hopefully when you actually try to trace the code yourself, you will be able to see that the static counter over here is going to cause. You can see here, when I try to add into Steve's account array, I will start with index 1 rather than index 0. So as soon as you see that, you will be able to answer to say it's actually wrong. So Michael, I would say to really answer this kind of question, I think that you have to just examine what's really being given to you. For example, what's given to you is only this fragment of code. And what you should do is to see how is that different from what you normally see. For this case, only the static keyword is extra. So in that case, you will try to maybe just run the normal usage for the method to call them, like call the like create, let's say 2 accounts, and then for both of them, try to call the add account maybe a few times, and then hopefully you will be able to see the wrong behavior. So that's how I would tackle this particular problem. In general, I would say mostly the question will be multiple choice. So you will be given some choices for you to choose from or to eliminate. So I think that part might be slightly better. But if you're really given some short essay question, so that one there is really to test you if you can really think critically, right? So given whatever code you're given, so you have to think about some example cases to use them, like how we do JUnit testing. and then to see from there what kind of runtime behavior might be expected from the code that you're given. If somehow the behavior is really bizarre or it's apparently wrong, so that's how you find out the answer. So Michael said, does it kind of help? I'm kind of thinking on my feet right now. So I would say to really answer this kind of question in general, is really testing to see whether you're able to trace the code, right? Rather than saying you're being given some code for you to trace, you want to come up with some code yourself and then trace it yourself, and then to see what's really wrong when you try to trace it for this particular given class over here.
So I just want to clarify. So you're basically asking us to write a response for like is the above program correct in general? Because I think you mentioned in lecture that it could work if and only if there's only if there's only one instance that you're playing around with. But if you have more than one instance, then there's more errors involved.
Correct. That's correct. So in your for it's good. So that means in your example program when you grade it, in your example, either well, of course, if you say it's actually yes, of course that's a wrong answer. We don't even need to look at what you said over there, right? In case you say no, you're right. If you only create only a single instance in your example program, you will not be able to see the error, because in that case you're always using the same counter for that particular instance, so you wouldn't see the error. It's really when you got multiple instances of the same class that can actually reveal the error. So you're right. So of course, but it's really different from question to question. I can only answer to say for this particular one, think about how you would normally use it. And the way how you normally use it, you should really create at least one or two instances and try it out. And then hopefully you can find out what the error is.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a tough question for me to answer, but I really try. Yeah, I mean, later on, maybe once we get to the exam review session, maybe we can speak more as you go through, I mean, all the lecture notes. All right, any more questions? All right, let me pause maybe a few moments. If you no more questions, then I should call it a day. All right, and then I'll maybe see you next week. Okay.
Thank you, Prof.
Oh, okay, you're welcome. All right, guys, seems like you're okay. All right, very good. Okay, don't worry. I think you can accumulate more questions either for the later weeks or maybe in the exam review session. I think we shall do that. All right, very good. Take care and then enjoy your spring, and then I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.